All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm so glad you're all able to join us today. Excited to have everybody here. For those of you who did just join, I will say I would love for you to have some pen and paper in front of you because we will be doing kind of some thought exercises today, and it would be great if you had a place to write things down. So I'd love to kind of start us off with an exercise that I've been doing for this past week, which has been asking people to share. You can either put it in chat or kind of unmute yourself and tell us, but one kind of happy or good thing that has already happened for you this year. So love to get us started on that positive note. Does anybody want to jump in?
Hi, Colleen. Good morning. How you doing?
Good morning.
I just got back from the Student Veterans Association's national conference yesterday and met a lot of great people and student leaders to help me start or revitalize the Student Veterans Association at the college that I go to, Barry University.
Nice. Congratulations. That's a great way to start off the new year, right? Lots of positive energy.
Yep.
And yes, definitely making it to the webinar counts, right? There are some days where I put on my accomplishment list, right? Like that everyone in my house was still alive at the end of the day, right? Like there are times that like simply remembering to feed the dog was my accomplishment for the day. How about other folks? Let's see, someone else got some certifications from Coursera. That's fun. Somebody else started a weekly online college group that is going well. Oh, collage group. Sorry, I read that as college. My morning eyes. Millie accepted a new job, which is so exciting, right? Somebody finished their Cornell Diversity and Inclusion certification. I've heard that's a great one. I've heard really good things about that. I will say I got a new puppy. So there are moments where I think that is a fabulous thing. And there's been a few moments where I thought, what were we thinking? But yes, total puppy. So thanks, everyone. I try to start meetings off with some sort of quick little icebreaker and something that kind of gets us in a positive thought. So thank you for indulging me today. So today we're talking about kind of finding your leadership voice. And I want to start off with, taking a second, and this is where if you have your pen and paper in front of you to jot some notes down, is to think for yourself, what type of leader do you want to be, right? So without just kind of jumping into what your voice is going to be, to really thinking about, who are the leaders that you respect? Who are the people who might have been managers or leaders in your workplace that, right, you have really respected or felt that they did such a great job kind of really leading a team? I have a friend who talks about the difference between leaders and managers. And she always says that like managers manage things and leaders lead people. And I always remembered that thinking, right, that's it, right? I wanted to be the person who leads people, right? I didn't want to manage the things so much. I always wanted to be the type of leader who was really dedicated to the people on my team. Now, right, everybody has a different type of leader who they naturally are and who they want to be. And we all have different types of leaders that we kind of want to emulate, or different leaders that we think are great. I wonder if anybody in the room has an example of a leader that they have really always wanted to kind of be like, or a leader who has just really shown them some great examples of what a leader kind of should be.
I'll share.
Yeah.
This is just an example of a leader that I have worked with, and it was one of my vice presidents, one of my previous vice presidents. And what I appreciated about him is that he really tried to motivate the entire team to really follow what their strengths were. To talk about Clifton, I don't think he was actually thinking of it in the Clifton way, but he just, I think he really wanted to capitalize on what we all could bring to the table, and then always when we got to a certain point, he would then push us further. And I liked it. It really worked for me. So I really like that.
Great. Yeah, I mean, those of you who know me know I am a strong believer in Clifton strengths and really kind of working with people where they are and helping them see their strengths and use their strengths to kind of propel themselves forward. You know, as a leader, I, always want to make sure that folks on my team know their strengths. Someone just put in the chat, Danielle put in, right, Michelle Obama, right? Someone who's innovative, enthusiastic, collaborative, connective, right? Those are fabulous traits, right? I would love to work for someone like Michelle Obama, right? Who had those traits, who's able to really kind of excite people and bring them forward. Yeah, go ahead, Millie.
I appreciate a leader that's a decisive person, somebody who makes good decisions, not so much somebody who makes quick decisions, off the cuff, but somebody who makes good decisions in a reasonable amount of time and is also really transparent about their reasons for making such decisions.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I will say one of my biggest pet peeves in meetings or in working with folks is to show up at a meeting or to have a leader who asks for a lot of discussion about something when they've already made a decision.
Yep.
Right.
Absolutely.
Huge pet peeve of mine. And I love folks who are able to kind of show up and be really transparent and say, here's the decision that I've made. Here's why. And now we're going to move forward with this. Or the person who shows up and says, hey, I really want all of your opinions on this because I'm unsure of which path to take.
Yeah. I could probably tell you, Colleen, I know the type of leader that I don't want to work for, or the type of leader who I don't want to emulate, more so than I could tell you the type of leader that, has probably been somebody ideal, but, somebody who, like Millie was saying, somebody who can make a decision, somebody who can't make a decision. I'm like, come on, man, you're in charge. Come on,
right.
Come on, whether I like you or not, or whether I like your decision or not, please make a decision.
Right.
Because like this, we can't live in this ambiguity, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the key jobs of a leader, right? It is one of the key jobs is to make those decisions. So I always tell folks, when you start thinking about the leader you want to be, start thinking of, the folks who you thought are great. Now, I think of someone like Danielle's example of Michelle Obama, who's like super enthusiastic about things. Now, there are people in this world who just aren't. Right. I have a very good friend who we all lovingly refer to as Eeyore, right? Because they are definitely the person who, no matter what, feels like they have that little black rain cloud above them. They are never, ever going to be the person who is overly enthusiastic about anything. And so you have to know who you are. So you might love Michelle Obama for her enthusiasm, but know that you yourself are not going to be the person who's ever going to show up into a room and be like, really enthusiastic and super positive about things. And that's okay, right? We all could be different types of leaders. So you may want to do that. And yes, there's ways that you can kind of look at your strengths and your own personality and kind of have some enthusiasm for things, of course, but don't try to be a leader who you aren't. So let's jump into this idea of leadership voice. And so right, if you kind of go out there and you start looking at, right, there's a whole bunch of books on leadership voice and all of that. But what I really think of about leadership voice is that your leadership voice is really a reflection of your core values, right? It is what are the things that are really, really, really important to you. And that also shows up in your communication skills, because this is how you present yourself as a leader. So, right, it's a whole combination of factors, your leadership voice, right? It is things like your presence and your demeanor and your attentiveness and how will you engage people, right? Some of that decisiveness and ability to make decisions, you know, kind of, I don't know, for lack of a better word, I always think bedside manner, right? That ability to kind of interact with people, as well as your confidence. But really, it's you figuring out how do you want to communicate as a leader, but that is really true to you. That is true to your core values. That is true to your communication styles. So when we think about that, right, we kind of think of leadership voice as more than just kind of, it's definitely more than just straight up presentation skills. This isn't just how do you show up and talk to a room. It's really a reflection of what are the things that are most important to you and how can you kind of present that moving forward. Does that make sense to folks? Yeah, Millie?
Question. How do you feel, like, do you consider leadership voice the same as executive presence? Because I feel like you don't necessarily have to be an executive to be a leader. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain that nuance a little bit.
Yeah, so, executive presence, when I do kind of workshops on executive presence, I do a lot of work on how do you come in and kind of command a room, right? It's like, to me, executive presence is a lot of the, how do you show up into a meeting, sit down at the table and have people be able to pay attention to you, right? How do you stand up in front of a room and have that, I don't know, charisma is the word that's coming to mind for me, but right, that presence to be there. Whereas I think your leadership voice, you don't have to be the executive. You don't have to be the C-suite. You don't have to be the person who's running anything to have your leadership voice, right? Your leadership voice is really, how do you really want to communicate with folks? I think your leadership voice is even most important when you are a leader. And so therefore, right, when you are a leader, you need to make sure that you are able to kind of communicate in a way that aligns with your core values. And how do you show up? I think of different leaders that I worked with through the years. And, two of my most favorite bosses through the years were both people who led very differently. One was someone who was really tight on our numbers, right? Like we had numbers that we reported weekly. She was really into kind of the small metric pieces, but she was also really good at teaching us. And her big thing, right? If you said to me, what was her leadership voice? I would instantly say her core values were developing others, making sure everybody had the skills they needed, and really helping to kind of make people the best they could. Right. So to me, that was kind of her version of leadership voice. The other person who I worked with, who I thought was fabulous, my other favorite boss, was almost the opposite when it came to metrics. She was like, once a quarter, give me your numbers, but otherwise she left everybody alone to do their work. Her leadership voice was one of, I trust my staff to do the work that I have asked them to do. And then she stepped back, right? She trusted that she had the right people in the right jobs. So they were different leadership voices, but they were able to kind of move us forward in that same way. Whereas I think executive presence really is that, like, how do you show up in the room moment?
Thanks.
Yeah, Colleen, I also think it's important, as a leader, but I think more, I don't know, I just feel like, there can be more than one leader, but, and as you mentioned, but I think it's important for the people who are being led to be open to being led. I just think a lot of people have opinions and ideas and things like that. And, it's discouraging, I think, sometimes for people's ideas not to be acted upon or what have you. But I think we have to have some emotional intelligence to understand that not every idea is feasible or within a budget or things like that. And it's not a personal sort of thing against the follower, so to speak, right? Because I think we all lead in different capacities, right? But I just think it's important for not only for your own success, but for the success of the leader, and in turn your own success. It's kind of like cyclical, that we accept things and be engaged in things so that we can be heard, or our ideas can be acted upon. In other words, if you just shut down because nobody acted on what you said, that's not helping anybody, and that's certainly not helping the leader at all.
Right. And I think that goes back to that being, as a leader, being really transparent about, right, what are things that you're actually asking for opinions on? What are things that you've already made a decision on? And some of the whys behind it, right? To be able to say, hey, right, Sean, I loved your idea of us buying bicycles for every kid in our town for Christmas this year, right? It's great. We just don't have the budget for that. Or, right, that doesn't align with our core mission and values of what we're trying to go for, right? So, I mean, it could be any reason, but to be able to make sure that some of those conversations happen, right? So let's start thinking about your core values, right? So one thing that I always want to throw out to folks is that your core values are going to change over time. As you grow as a human being, your core values are going to change. Now, there may be some things that are going to be really steadfast and the type of things that you might have for like your entire life. But the things that are really important to you change over time, depending on what phase of life you're in, right? I think of the things that were really important to me at, 22, when I was single and living in Boston with a roommate, and right, the things that were super important to me, right? Things that are important to me back then, I was like, I wanted to travel. I wanted to have a job that, allowed me to make enough money to go on a couple of 2 vacations a year. And that was it. Like, that's pretty much what I really was valuing at that moment in time. I valued health insurance. But aside from that, there weren't a whole lot of things that were really kind of integral to what I was looking for in a job. I was looking for a job that just allowed me to literally stay in the Boston area and not have to move home with my parents. So I guess I was valuing my independence at that age, right? I have to say at 51, there are a lot more things that are important to me in life right now, right? Life is very different than it was 30 years ago for me. So there are things, right? Yes, I definitely still value independence, but not at the same level as I did back then, right? Now I'm way more open to kind of asking for help from people, where at 21 or 22, I was really a staunch independent person, right? Didn't want to have to ask anybody for any help. So as you think about the things that are really important to you, and yes, you can be a leader in all different ways, not just in work. But I feel like we're talking a lot about using your leadership voice at work. So there are many different ways for you to kind of look at your core values. So I am going to, I have a checklist for you. That is a core values checklist that I'm going to drop in the chat in 1 second. So it's in the chat, the core values checklist that I have, my career values, that you can do later, you can do now. I'll also send it an email later if as a follow-up if you cannot kind of download it from there for some reason. But really, when you're thinking about this, I always kind of make people look at their core values in a couple of different phases, right? Step one is to kind of make the list of all of the things that are important to you, right? What are the things that are important to you in your life, right? And they could be any of these things, right? I see on this list, right? Ethics, integrity, trust, honesty, value, right? People, quality. You know, what are the things that are going to be most important to you? On the checklist, you'll also see that then I ask you to narrow it down to about 5 to 7. And once you narrow it down to those 5 to 7, to me, one of the really important steps when folks are kind of thinking about what are their core values and what are the things that really are important to them, right? What are the things that you are really committed to, is that they don't actually define them for themselves, right? So let's do a quick example here. So when I say responsibility is a core value of yours. So let's say, right, we're going to say everyone in this group today has responsibility as a core value. I'm going to give you a minute and I want you to type in the chat, what is your definition of responsibility? What does responsibility mean to you? All right, so a lot of people are writing things around kind of accountability, follow through, completing the things you're committed to, being accountable to self and others, owning mistakes, taking control, follow through, commitment to a deadline, being present, accountable, and responsive. Oh, I love that one. Considering others in the decision making, right? So we all have a slightly different definition of responsibility. And so when it comes to that, that's why I think it's really important for folks when they decide, you know, when you're thinking about your core values, to actually define them for yourself and really think, what is it that this means to me? You know, other things, right, could mean very different things. You know, responsibility is one of the ones that probably there's not huge variations. But when I ask people who believe in things like, let's say, flexible workplace, right? I have always been a leader who has been in the mindset of, I don't care what time you clock in and leave, just get the work done, right? I don't care what hours you work. You want to work 7 to 3, you want to work 11 to 7. I didn't really care as long as you produced what it was you did. To me, that was, you know, workplace flexibility. I've worked at places where workplace flexibility to the boss meant you could show up at 8, 8:15, or 8:30, right? That was their version of workplace flexibility. So it can be very different from person to person, all of these things. So think about yourself and the core values that are really important to you. So I will say for myself as a leader, when I think of what are my core values always come back to trust, which to me is I trust the people who work for me to get the job done that they say they're going to do, right? And which means that I have to make sure that I live that in everything that I do as a leader. So when I sit down one-on-one with folks for weekly meetings, I would say I would just kind of ask for some updates, but I wouldn't ask for nitty-gritties, right? I wouldn't ask for minute little bits of information. I wanted big picture. And I would start, right, by always telling folks that I trusted them, right? I hired you to do a job and I trust that you do it. I also trust, and I make sure that I use that word regularly. I also trust that you're going to ask me when you need help. I trust that you are going to reach out when you need things. Let me see. Just going to mute. There we go. So thinking about what are the things that are really important to you and communicating them, because then people actually know your voice. They know what it is, how you want to show up as a leader. And to be able to have that conversation makes it even that much better, right? Makes your leadership voice stronger and makes your leadership voice be able to stand out there. Right. I know people who have written, maybe they have a little plaque on their desk or something like that that says, right, kind of leadership to me is, and they actually write what it is, right? What are the things that are important to them? So start to figure out your leadership voice by really knowing your core values. What is really important to you? Does anyone have any questions on there? Let's see, there's a question in the chat that says, I love the idea of trust, but how do they know exactly what exactly you need? And so do you mean that they being your team?
Yeah, the employees, because, and it's Kaisa. So,
yeah.
But yeah, no, basically just, I guess you must have an initial conversation that explains exactly what you're looking for, or you have iterative conversations along the way that, because I think sometimes I've run into, and this would be, in my opinion, an example of bad leadership, right? Where they're just like, do this. And it's like a 3-word, sentence or whatever, for 3-word phrase. And you're like, oh, okay. Like what do you want? So I'm just wondering
right.
how that tends to work out for you.
Absolutely. So I will say it took learning, right? So becoming a leader isn't something that happens overnight. It takes learning and making some mistakes. So, I will say that I definitely made some mistakes in the beginning with this idea of kind of leading through trusting my employees, in the sense that some people needed something different from me. So one of my core values really became over time in individualization. The fact that I actually lead on a team people differently. So it may be a case of that you're someone who needs me to sit down weekly or biweekly and say, here's our major goal, right? Our major goal is to, produce a magazine every month, right? So we're going to be producing a magazine every month. And that's our goal, right? Our goal is to get that magazine out. And, you're someone who needs us to kind of sit through and say, okay, here are the 25 graphics that you need to do this month. Well, it could be that I say, here are the 25 graphics that need to get done. And you're like, great. And you run with it. Well, then I sit down with Millie. She has the same assignment, but she really wants me to kind of give her a little bit more, right? She wants me to kind of say, I don't know, the color scheme that they all should be in, right? So people need different things. And it's making sure that as a leader, you know what your staff needs, right? That that the folks that you're leading, what they need. I will say, from a trust idea, my goal has always been to try to be as clear as I possibly can with what the end goal is. And my trust comes in where I say, I trust, right? I hired you because I trust you can do the job. Right. And people have different types. So Nicole just put in, she enjoys a stoic type of leadership versus an emotional type. Right. People like different things. There are some leaders who are very stoic, right? They are very straightforward. They are unemotional about kind of what it is that needs to get done. And then there are leaders who are very emotional. I worked for a leader at one point who, was super emotional. And, the super over emotional was really a struggle to work with sometimes for me. Now, other people really enjoyed her style. I'm not really good as the stoic type. I'm somewhere in between probably the two, but right. I think it's figuring out for yourself who it is that you want to be. And then really, truly, right, showing the confidence in that area and embracing that area, that strength that you want, right? Don't be shy about the type of leader you want to be, right? If you decide you want to be the Stoic leader, but it could be that you decide you want to be a more emotional leader, right? It could be that you are a leader who is, really focused on metrics and KPIs and the numbers and the data. And right, Sean might be the leader who's really focused on the well-being of all of his team, right? So it doesn't mean that one is necessarily better than the other, but it's embracing what it is that you want to be and what type of leader you want to be. Now, getting there is a different story, right? So sometimes it is figuring out, how do you show confidence in those areas? People who have heard me speak before know I'm a huge proponent of the Gallup Strengths Assessment. If you haven't done it, look it up, look into it. I love kind of when I work with people and do executive coaching with folks, I really work with folks on diving into their strengths, looking at the strengths that they have, and really being able to go out into the world with those as their lens, right? To go out into your leadership vision. So for me, if any of you were seeing my little mug that I've been holding up, it actually has my strengths listed on it. But right, one of my top strength is maximizer. Maximizer is that idea of kind of going out there and taking things that are good and making them better. And so that's how I lead. And I tell people that. And I always say to folks, right, this definitely puts me in there's definitely some downfalls to this type of leadership, right? Because the take things good and making it better means every time I do something, even if it's the same thing over and over and over again, I change it a little bit every time because I always want it to be a little bit better. So I kind of go with that, but I embrace that. And I tell people that. I start by saying, right, this is how I lead. I am a maximizer and I'm going to put it out there. So I can take my maximizer strength and apply it to how I lead. And that's one of the things I really encourage the folks that I work with to do. Embrace the strengths that you have. Show confidence in the area that you have. I also will say that, imposter syndrome is real. And so, if you haven't heard of imposter syndrome, right, this is the kind of the thoughts in your head that kind of doubt your achievements, this kind of persistent fear that someone's going to figure out that you're kind of a fraud and don't know what you're doing. And imposter syndrome is totally real, right? There's lots and lots of books out there written on it, lots of ideas on how to get over it. But I'll tell you a few things, right? One, develop a new script for yourself. So if you find yourself going down this hole of, I'm not a leader, I can't be a leader because I'm not like Michelle Obama, right? I can't be a leader because I'm not innovative and enthusiastic, or I can't be a leader because I haven't done it before. Change the script in your head. Stop, as soon as you start going down that road, stop, take a deep breath, right? And instead, think about the time that you were. Think about a time that you accomplished something. Think about how you have gone forward with things, right? So you can kind of put that piece forward. I always say too, one of the best ways to kind of show confidence and embrace your strengths is to start by owning your own accomplishments. Really, truly remember the things that you have accomplished. If you are someone who struggles with this, I always recommend people just, do it for the month of January. I look up, I have a calendar on my wall, right? One of those traditional old school calendars with just all the little boxes and every single day, write something that you accomplished on it, right? Start getting yourself in the mindset of, look at all that I accomplished, because then you're going to start kind of down that road of kind of feeling that. The last thing that I'll say about imposter syndrome is know that everybody else doesn't really know what they're doing half the time too, right? Most people show up for things that they are not 100% sure of. So if you are someone who is willing to learn and move forward and kind of take it on and make mistakes and own those mistakes, that's all you need to do, right? People, not everybody else knows what they know. So, try to kind of show that confidence about the things you know. Great. So there was a couple of things in the chat that I wanted to come back to. One is Omar wrote in, right, that he believes that we're a sum of all of our experiences and product of our environment. So these external things may not match our core values. So, right, it's important to adapt and that our core values change over time, but sometimes your core values may not match what's being asked or requested of. So how do you manage when this level of conflict happens? Yeah, so, for me, I always want to stay true to my core values. So, right, I struggled. So I think of individualization as a perfect example here, right? The idea for me of individualization is that I treat each of my employees as individuals, right? So I treat people slightly differently. And I will say human resources departments aren't a huge fan of this sometimes, right? HR wants us to say that we treat everybody exactly the same. Well, that's not me, and that's not one of my core values, and that's not how I lead, right? If I'm, I keep saying Sean and Millie because they're just both next to me on my screen. So, right, if I am supervising both Sean and Millie, right, I know that they both come to me with very different experiences. They come to me with different life experiences, with different work experiences, with different strengths, with different skills, and therefore I am going to treat them differently, right? And it has, not from a bias standpoint or anything like that, but it's more, right, what Sean needs from me might be just different than what Millie needs from me. And there are times that there is conflict with that. So I have had human resources with one of my employees years ago tell me I couldn't do something that I wanted to do for them. Because they said, right, it's not what we do. It's not how we do things. And I had real internal conflict with this. And I could have gotten myself fired over what I did because I really stuck to my core value of what this employee needed. And, I am happy that I did not get fired over it, but I didn't think I was going to, because the employee was not going to go rat on me to HR because I was doing what they needed instead of what HR was telling me I should be doing. And so sometimes that happens, right? And as a leader, there are times where you might have to do something that goes totally against what your core values are. So one of the other examples I can give is responsibility, right? So someone had put in their definition, Samantha had put in that one of her definitions of responsibility is considering others in decision making. And so somebody who I was coaching has very high responsibility. It is in the Clifton Strengths Assessment, it's their number one strength, right? That is what they lead with, responsibility. And I would say that level of responsibility weighs really heavy on people's shoulders, right? It is a heavy strength to have. So this is someone who really felt this level of responsibility and ends up had to lay off 2 staff because of a downturn in the economy this was a couple of years ago, or downturn in their kind of particular area. And so because she had to do that, this really weighed on her, right? This was really kind of a huge internal conflict because she had to decide who on her team were the 2 who needed to go, right? She was a pretty high level. She might have been, I think she was an associate vice president at her company. And she had about 40 people who reported to her, and she had to decide who were the 2 people who had to be let go. And this was a huge internal conflict because HR pretty much came back and said, you have 2 choices. You can either do, right, last in, first out, so the last 2 people hired, or you could do it by task, right? Like, what do you need? Who has the skills to do the work in order to kind of get you there? And she really struggled with this. This was a lot of conflict. And so it took some real kind of talking through this. So I think when that conflict happens for you, I think it's great to have somebody who you can have this conversation with, be it your own, right? I always say people should have their own personal board of advisors, right? That you have a few people in your life that you can go to say, hey, give me some advice on this. Or if it's a coach, or if it's someone in HR, figuring out who that is that you can have those conversations with and really kind of see how you can do that. Now, on the other hand, if you are in a full-time leadership role that is in constant conflict with your core values, I think then it's time to look for another job. So that would be, to me, right? I could not be full 100% in as a leader in a place that went against my core values. So let's see. So one of the next things as your leadership voice is to really remember is that we all have some biases. We all have them. As much as we would like to say we don't, we all have something in there, right? Either, and it may not be, right, the hardcore, right, kind of racism type bias, but maybe it's something as simple as, right, the slippery slope fallacy or the hindsight bias, or, right, maybe without realizing it, you have some ageism in there, right, that you're saying, oh, well, right, we need to hire someone younger because they're the people who know social media these days, right? Thinking about it is knowing that we all have biases, no matter what we think we do or don't. And I think some of it is just thinking for yourself is, can you make sure that your biases are not kind of going to kind of interfere with your leadership voice, right? That you're able to acknowledge that you have biases and instead say, right, what can I do about it? How do I make sure that I can check my biases? And maybe it's that you have somebody who can help you check your biases, right? Now, I think it's great to have people on my team who come back to me and say, hey, you know what? That came off as, right, a bias against someone. Or, right, it's great to be able to have that person who can check that for you. Because as a leader, you want to make sure that you are really out there trying to strengthen your team and not cut them down because of these biases. The next thing for your kind of getting a really good leadership voice is to learn to listen. If you are, I always think of myself, right? I am a talker. I talk for a living. I love to talk. I love to give advice, right? It is, as a coach, I love to kind of coach people and get them where they need to be. And so knowing that, I have to make sure that I stop myself and make sure that I listen. And that as a leader, I pay really close attention to both the verbal and the nonverbal communication of the folks that I'm working with. Because being able to really kind of hear what's happening is such an important part of being a leader. And for me, that was something that took a lot of practice. In my early leadership roles, it was something that I actually had a coach who kind of helped coach me through to be able to sit and listen, because I am not good with silence. Whenever I give people a chance on a webinar and I say, oh, I'll give you 2 minutes to work on that, and I sit there and I watch the clock tick for 2 minutes, I've learned I have to do things like put a 2-minute timer on my phone. So I actually give them the 2 minutes, because if I say 2 minutes of silence, 20 seconds in, I'm like, great, are we done? Let's move forward, right? Just not good with it. So I had to really develop that skill. And as a leader, to really listen to each other, to make sure that you're listening to your team is invaluable, right? So your leadership voice has to be, right, how you listen, but also, right, how you speak in your leadership voice, but also how you listen. So the very last piece of developing your leadership voice is also figuring out, how do you react to criticism, right? And how do you learn to accept criticism? Because as a leader, no matter what, people are going to criticize you, right? And so one, it's knowing about which pieces of criticism to take and which pieces of criticism that you don't need to take, right? Anytime someone gives you feedback, you don't have to accept every single piece of feedback someone says to you as truth, right? Not every single thing that someone says to you in a feedback loop is going to be 100% true. So think about figuring out, how do you decide what pieces of feedback are worth taking, or not even worth taking, are you able to accept and able to do something about, right? So as a leader, sometimes you can't accept or you can't do anything about a critique that somebody says to you, right? That there are rules about it. If somebody's, upset about how you handled something, right? Sometimes there are straight up rules and regulations about how things happen. Other times, to be able to accept that criticism and say, you're right, I can do better. And thinking to yourself, how do you do better? So, I think, as Casisa said there too, right? Criticism is also a good sign when you're in a leadership position, when it's reasonable, right? People, you want to get feedback. If you are a leader who does not want feedback, you are never going to grow as a leader, right? When I work with folks as an executive coach, I actually ask them, can you give me the names of 2 people who report to you so I can have a conversation with them, or 2 people who, right, a few people who are on your team or are above you or adjacent to you, right? And not in a full 360 way. So if folks are familiar, there is a kind of evaluation method that's called the 360, where you get feedback from all of these different sources and then that gets presented to you. Sometimes I think that's a bit overwhelming. But I do ask folks, if they're struggling in a leadership role, is there a way for me to talk to some people that you work with to get some feedback if you're not comfortable doing it? Because the only way for you to grow as a leader and make sure that your leadership voice is coming off how you want it to be is by accepting that criticism, is by learning to kind of take it in and getting that feedback and moving forward.
Colleen?
Yes.
I was just wondering if you could, if I don't know if you have one or not, but, I know when you mentioned that, I was just like sitting back like, yeah, because I know I've taken criticism in the past. I think I've taken it well. And when I say taking it well, I think that I've projected maybe taking it well, but sometimes not, you know what I mean? I think I can take criticism, but there's sometimes where I just get so like kind of overwhelmed with the feedback I get, that I just can't, like, it's just paralyzing. As an example, over the holidays, a relative gave me some feedback that I thought was kind of crazy, but that's how they felt about it, and that's how it is. And it just bothered me for days and days and days, and I wanted to just kind of end it, or just kind of get it out of my head, but I just found like I couldn't, get it out of my head. It was probably because it was a little true. And it was, but I still didn't really, appreciate it or think that was a good criticism. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on, you received some criticism, good, particularly negative criticism, how you can go about processing it or, discarding it, as the case might be. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of years ago, I was doing some work with a client and we were just talking about getting feedback, right? And so if one person gives you some criticism about something, so I'm trying to think of a good example. So somebody that I worked with was told that she does not make decisions, right? So as a leader, right, somebody was talking before, right, of having that leader who's indecisive, that she was told, right, that she wasn't making decisions. And she was shocked at this because she's thinking to herself, oh my God, I make like 90 decisions every day, all day long for this organization. Like all I do all day is make decisions. So what it ended up appearing to be was that because of her collaborative nature of talking through things with people, it showed up as she herself wasn't willing to make the decision to be able to make the collaboration. So sometimes it's figuring out the nuances of that, right? Is it something as simple as that, right? It's a miscommunication around it. But other times, right, I always say, think about who the feedback's coming from. A good friend of mine one day said, is this someone you would allow to watch your children or your pets? Or, right, would you leave a child or a dog with this person? And if the answer is no, there's probably a good chance you don't need to accept their feedback. Right. And so some of it is thinking, where are they coming from and why are they giving you this feedback? Is it self-serving to them? So other times, if you realize, right, yeah, there's some truth to that. Accepting criticism and feedback is not easy, right? It is the type of thing that I always tell folks to go sleep on. I probably get half the calls that I get that are kind of quick calls, like people need to talk to me really quickly, is because of a poor performance review. And I always tell folks, or they've been written up for something, right? Something along those lines. And I tell folks, right, give it a week, like go do some reflection on it, think about it, and let's come back and discuss it then. Because after you've had a little time, let's discuss why they kind of gave you that feedback, where it might have been coming from, and is it something that you would want to kind of work on to kind of change? And if it is, then, right, let's look at your strengths and figure out how you change it and kind of show up differently. For the leader who was told she didn't make decisions, it was really as simple as her kind of literally saying in meetings or in an email, right, thank you all for your feedback. My decision is XYZ. Right. So she was able to just put the words to it to then show people like, yes, I am making decisions. So sometimes it's actually making sure that you are communicating your leadership voice to folks, right? You're saying, I am leading with trust. I am leading with collaboration. And because I'm leading with collaboration, it doesn't mean that I'm not willing to make the decisions. I will be making the decisions, but I also really, truly honor collaboration.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah. So we have about 2 or 3 minutes left here. So I did drop in the chat my website, also my Calendly. If anybody did want to follow up, I'm happy to do a 30-minute call with folks. So you can click on my Calendly link there and set something up if you'd like. But I will leave it open. I'm going to stop the recording now as well. So hold on one second.